sector growth. They're back again, but they've learned some new ideas. Smart growth, new urbanism, form-based codes. The same ideas with new titles. We are organizing against those who would use the planning process as a Trojan horse for regulatory land use policies that in reality try to convince citizens to give up their own property rights as a means for potentially taking away the property rights of our neighbors. We see that in the name of planning, some would obscure both the cost and the true meaning of their efforts to control land use. Smart growth, a clever term, but what it actually wants to do is limit growth. New urbanism, it really wants to take us back to an old 1920s urbanism. Misleading names, to hide exclusionary tactics that seek to enact good-sounding but counterproductive measures that artificially distort consumer demand. Houston is very much a can-do city, and we believe, despite calls to the contrary, that business as usual is actually a very wise course. It's worked for the last 80 years, and we don't need to fix it. As an example of another term, traffic calming. Sounds great until you understand what it means. Traffic calming is actually causing traffic to encourage people to become pedestrians or transit riders. I can't imagine many people in Houston, Texas being calm once they understand the term. But seeing through the easy catchphrases is why Houston is the largest American city without zoning. After past offerings of utopian improvements through zoning, our citizens read the fine print and repeatedly rejected the reality of higher housing costs, weaker job creation, and severely restricted property rights. Familiar pro-zoning faces, including some of the folks we have here tonight, are now pushing smart growth and new urbanism, piecemeal, ordinance by ordinance. It's all coming at us from different directions, but it all adds up to a comprehensive change and a threat to what has made Houston great. We are working hard to educate members of the City Council who may not be aware of this strategy, which will kill our free market approach to prosperity. Already passed or in the pipeline are ordinances that define parks and open space, high density, mixed-use housing, transit-oriented development, urban corridors, form-based codes, and available facilities requirements. Those of you who are familiar with smart growth and new urbanism recognize those titles as part of that school of thought. Why would we do this to our fair city when smart growth policies across the nation are being abandoned as often as they are being adapted? In 1923, John H. Kirby, a lumber and oil magnate, and others had it right when they concluded the city should plan for public roads and parks, but should not dictate the use of private land. We believe in prudent planning to chart our course for future prosperity. We believe it is the responsibility of local government to carefully plan for public expenditures and private entities to plan for private expenditures. John L. Mencken once wrote, "For every complex problem, there's a simple solution that is usually wrong." And in this case, we see a considerable effort underway to sell Houston again on something short of zoning, but which taken as a whole amounts to the same thing, heavy land use rejection. Thus, in a recent survey by Rice University, it was found that more than 60% polled supported a seemingly simple proposition of greater land use regulation. We find it noteworthy that a higher percentage of respondents were evident just before zoning was rejected 15 years ago. The devil is in the details, of course, and despite some calls for detouring around the city charter requirements that require that 6-month deliberations and a public vote, we believe the public will again reject heavy-handed land use restrictions. In Houston, we do not need to reform the collateral damage of exclusionary zoning policies because we never suffered through them. Our mix, now deemed appropriate by the planning community, always has always thrown varying income groups together in Houston. One of the major goals of smart growth is to mix up income groups. Houston, because it followed the free market, is already there. Our struggle now is to educate the public about the piecemeal parts of what amounts to a reversal of the public's rejection of heavy land use regulation that are contained within the positive steps, sometimes promoted as a better plan. If you ask an average person whether they would prefer a 4-lane highway or an 8-lane highway, they might answer 4 lanes. But if you ask the same person whether they would prefer to sit in traffic for 30 minutes or the 15 minutes that an additional lane would make possible, the informed answer is usually quite different. We reject calls to import the bad ideas from elsewhere. Instead, we embrace the lowest and most local form of land use control, deed restrictions, which represents agreement between those in neighborhoods and those who may buy a home in a neighborhood to abide by special covenants. We will be working with City Hall to erase the significant barriers to updating the established such deed restrictions. Our citizens need legal help in the process, and they need an easy template and step-by-step guide for making these restrictions work better. In closing, we want to challenge the proponents of smart growth and new urbanism to prove their vision's worth by competing in Houston's open marketplace. We pledge to help remove regulatory barriers that stand in the way of permitting their style of development. Let the consumer decide and show us if their development visions really work. Thank you so much.